Welcome, dear colleagues, to the annual Human Rights Observation hosted by the International Council of Psychologists. My name is Erin Cameron, and I'm honored to be the moderator for this year's celebration. I'm also honored to be the student chair to the ICP board and a member of the Conference Planning Committee. I'm speaking to you from Whidbey Island in the Puget Sound of North America and from the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish indigenous peoples, including the Swinomish, Suquamish, Snohomish, Lower Skagit, and Kikalis tribes, who called this island Chocolasi. I'm now going to share a short poem by Langston Hughes. Hughes was a crucial part of the Harlem Renaissance, a time in the 1920s when the Black intellectualism, literature, and art flourished. Hughes was one of the innovators of jazz poetry, and he also wrote plays and short stories. In 1936, he published this poem called Let America Be America Again. This poem centers on the American dream and brings up the point that for many Americans, the ideals of equality and freedom have never been realized. Hughes' words are powerful and remain relevant today. Let America be America again. I am the poor, white, fooled, and pushed apart. I am the Negro bearing slavery scars. I am the red man driven from the land. I am the immigrant clutching the hope I seek and finding only the same old stupid plan of dog eat dog, of mighty crush the weak. Despite this juxtaposition of American ideals and the harsh reality, Hughes ends the poem on a hopeful note that one day America will live up to its own standards. Like Hughes, we hold the ideal that America and the rest of the world will live up to the standards of human rights and dignity that have been put forth in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Today, we are going to learn about this declaration and how it has been and still needs to be put into practice across the globe. Our focal point this year is on displaced peoples worldwide at the hands of both human-made and natural disasters. Climate change is perhaps the defining crisis of our time, and disaster displacement is one of its most devastating consequences. Today, we hold vigil for these individuals as well as those displaced by human conflict and war. Again, thank you for joining us today. We hope that you find meaning and connection and joy as we come together for today's human rights event.
I ask for a moment of silence for the more than 82 million displaced people in the world.
A ritual to read to each other. If you don't know the kind of person I am, and I don't know the kind of person you are, a pattern that others made may prevail in the world, and following the wrong God home, we may miss our star. For there is many a small betrayal of the mind, a shrug that lets the fragile sequence break, sending the shouts, the horrible errors of childhood, storming out to play through the broken dike. And as elephants parade, holding each elephant's tail, but if one wanders, the circus won't find the park. I call it cruel, and maybe the root of all cruelty to know what occurs, but not recognize the fact. And so I appeal to a voice, to something shadowy, a remote, important region in all who talk. Though we could fool each other, we should consider, lest the parade of our mutual life get lost in the dark. For it is important that awake people be awake, or a breaking line may discourage them back to sleep. The signals we give, yes, no, or maybe, should be clear. The darkness around us is deep. The International Council of Psychologists is a co-host of the Global Network of Psychology for Human Rights. The network is a platform for information exchange and action at the intersection of psychology and human rights. The tagline of the Global Network is "Psychology matters for human rights matter for psychology." Some members of the network gathered together to remind us of this important reciprocal relationship.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights.
A psicologia é importante para os direitos humanos.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights, and human rights matter for psychology.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights. I am called Didi Masusu.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights.
Psychologie is belangrijk voor mensenrechten.
Psychology matters for human rights.
Human rights matter for psychology.
حقوق الإنسان مهمة لعلم النفس.
Psychology matters for human rights.
Kia ora. Human rights matters for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters in human rights.
La psicología es importante para los derechos humanos.
Психология важна для прав человека.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Ihmisoikeudet ovat tärkeitä psykologialle.
Human rights matter for psychology.
Psychology matters for human rights.
We hope that you will consider joining the Global Network of Psychologists for Human Rights. Here is the URL of the website.
Hello, my name is David Edwards, and I'm joining you from the beautiful Pacific Northwest of North America. I'm honored to be invited back to share some music for this year's Human Rights Observation. I chose this song to support this year's theme of displaced peoples. Stay strong, and nothing can change your world, even if you end up across the universe. Words are flowing out like endless rain into a paper cup. They slither while they pass, they slip away across the universe. Pools of sorrow, waves of joy are drifting through my open mind, possessing and caressing me. Jai Guru Deva Om. Nothing's gonna change my world. 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 Images of broken light which dance before me like a million eyes. They call me on and on across the universe. Thoughts meander like a restless wind inside a letterbox. They tumble blindly as they make their way across the universe. Jai Guru Deva Om. Nothing's gonna change my world. 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 Sounds of laughter, shades of life are ringing through my open ears, inciting and inviting me. Limitless, undying love which shines around me like a million suns and calls me on and on across the universe. Jai Guru Deva Om. Nothing's gonna change my world. 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 Jai Guru Deva, Jai Guru Deva, Jai Guru Deva.
Thank you, David, for sharing this special music with us today. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly on December 10, 1948, was the result of the experience of the Second World War. With the end of that war and the creation of the United Nations, the international community vowed never again to allow atrocities like those of that conflict happen again. World leaders decided to complement the UN Charter with a roadmap to guarantee the rights of every individual everywhere. This was the birth of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. 2021 marks the 73rd anniversary of this declaration. Please join us as ICP members from around the world collectively read the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
To the Preamble 1, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world.
Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief, and freedom from fear and want, has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people.
Whereas it is essential, if man is not to be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law.
Whereas it's essential to promote friendly relations between nations.
Whereas the peoples of the United Nations have in the Charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, and in the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom.
Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve
in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect for and observance of human rights and fundamental freedoms.
Whereas a common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance for the full realization of this pledge.
The General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all peoples and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society, keeping this declaration constantly in mind, shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance, both among the peoples of member states themselves and among the peoples of territories under their jurisdiction.
Article 1. All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in a spirit of brotherhood.
Каждый человек должен обладать всеми правами и всеми свободами, провозглашенными настоящей декларацией, без какого бы то ни было различия, как то в отношении расы, цвета кожи, пола, языка, религии, политических или иных убеждений, национального или социального происхождения, имущественного, сословного или иного положения. Кроме того, не должно проводиться никаких различий на основе политического, правового или международного статуса страны или территории, к которой человек принадлежит. Независимо от того, является ли эта территория независимой, подопечной, несамоуправляющейся или какой-либо иначе ограниченной в своем суверенитете.
Perkara 3. Setiap orang adalah berhak kepada nyawa, kebebasan, dan keselamatan diri.
No one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms.
لا يتعرض أي إنسان للتعذيب ولا العقوبات أو المعاملات القاسية أو الوحشية أو الحاطة بالكرامة.
I will be reading Article 6, which states, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law.
Article 7. All are equal before the law and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. All are entitled to equal protection against any discrimination in violation of this declaration and against any incitement to such discrimination.
憲法や法律によって認められた基本的な権利を侵す行為に対しては、何人もしっかりとした国家機関によって適切な救済を得る権利を持つ。
Nadie podrá ser arbitrariamente detenido, preso, ni desterrado.
Article 10. Everyone is entitled in full equality to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal in the determination of his rights and obligations and of any criminal charge against him.
Article 11, number 1, everyone charged with a penal offense has the right to be presumed innocent until proved guilty according to law in a public trial at which he has all the guarantees necessary for his defense. Number 2, no one shall be held guilty of any penal offense on account of any act or omission which did not constitute a penal offense under national or international law at the time when it was committed, nor shall a heavier penalty be imposed than the one that was applicable at the time the penal offense was committed.
Article 12. No one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with his privacy, family, home, or correspondence, nor to attacks upon his honor and reputation. Everyone has the right to the protection of the law against such interference or attacks.
Article 13 of the UDHR. Everyone has the right to freedom of movement and residence within the borders of each state. Everyone has the right to leave any country, including his or her own, and to return to his or her country.
Everyone has the right to seek and to enjoy in other countries asylum from persecution. This right may not be invoked in the case of prosecutions genuinely arising from the non-political crimes or from the acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
1. 何人も国籍を持つ権利がある。2. 誰一人として国籍を剥奪されることも、国籍を変える権利を否定されることもない。
Article 16. Men and women of full age, without any limitation due to race, nationality, or religion, have the right to marry and to found a family. They are entitled to equal rights as to marriage, during marriage, and at its dissolution. Marriage shall be entered into only with the free and full consent of the intending spouses. The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to protection by society and the state.
First, everyone has the right to own property alone, as well as in association with others. And second, no one shall be arbitrarily deprived of his or her property.
Article 18. Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance.
Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes the freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas through any medium, regardless of frontiers.
Article 20. Everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. No one may be compelled to belong to an association.
Everyone has the right to take part in the government of his country, directly or through freely chosen representatives. 2. Everyone has the right of equal access to public service in his country. 3. The will of the people shall be the basis of the authority of government. This will should be expressed in periodic and genuine elections, which shall be by universal and equal suffrage, and should be held by secret vote or by equivalent free voting procedures.
Everyone, as a member of society, has the right to Social Security and is entitled to realization through national effort and international cooperation, and in accordance with the organization and resources of each state, of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his dignity and the free development of his personality.
Article 23. 1. Everyone has the right to work, to free choice of employment, to just and favourable conditions of work, and to protection against unemployment. 2. Everyone, without any discrimination, has the right to equal pay for equal work. 3. Everyone who works has the right to just and favourable remuneration, ensuring for himself and his family an existence worthy of human dignity, and supplemented, if necessary, by other means of social protection. 4. Everyone has the right to form and to join trade unions for the protection of his interests.
Article 24. Everybody has the right to rest and leisure, including reasonable limitations on working hours and periodic holidays with pay.
Article 25. Everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and of his family, including food, clothing, housing, and medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood in circumstances beyond his control. Motherhood and childhood are entitled to special care and assistance. All children, whether born in or out of wedlock, shall enjoy the same social protection.
Article 26, number 1. Everyone has the right to education. Education shall be free, at least in the elementary and fundamental stages. Elementary education shall be compulsory. Technical and professional education shall be made generally available, and higher education shall be equally accessible to all on the basis of merit. Number 2. Education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among all nations, racial and religious groups, and shall further the activities of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. Number 3. Parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children.
Svatko ima pravo slobodno sudjelovati u kulturnom životu zajednice, uživati u umjetnosti i sudjelovati u znanstvenom razvoju i njegovim koristima. Svatko ima pravo na zaštitu moralnih i materijalnih interesa koji proizlaze iz bilo kojeg znanstvenog, književnog ili umjetničkog dijela kojemu je autor ili autorica.
Everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in this declaration can be fully realized.
Everyone has duties to the community in which alone the free and full development of their personality is possible. In the exercise of their rights and freedoms, everyone shall be subject only to such limitations as are determined by law solely for the purpose of securing due recognition and respect for the rights and freedoms of others and of meeting the just requirements of morality, public order, and the general welfare in a democratic society. These rights and freedoms may in no case be exercised contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations.
Nothing in this declaration may be interpreted as implying for any state, group, or person any right to engage in any activity or to perform any act aimed at the destruction of any of the rights and freedoms set forth herein.
In the spirit of ICP bringing us all together at this period of time, we'd like to take a moment and recognize people from around the world who've faced especially difficult challenges this past year. Of note are the peoples of Afghanistan. Of course, due to the overthrow of government and the takeover by a hostile regime, countless people throughout the country have been displaced and are now living under conditions in which it's constant threat. Please join us in taking a moment of silence and remembering the challenges they ongoingly face. Thank you.
The 1951 Geneva Convention relating to the status of refugees defines refugee as a person who has crossed an international border owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion. We might ask, Does this Universal Declaration of Human Rights pertain to refugees? The answer to this is yes. The UDHR was written for every individual, everywhere. Unfortunately, refugees are often not afforded basic human rights, which has necessitated action by international governing bodies such as the United Nations. Next, we're going to hear about the 1951 Geneva Convention and human rights for refugees.
Just like anyone else, refugees have rights, and states have a duty to protect them. The basis of these rights is found in the 1951 Geneva Convention and its protocol. Within the UN system, the key agency involved in protecting refugees is the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or UNHCR. The core principle of the 1951 Convention is non-refoulement. No refugee should be returned to a country where they could face serious threats to their life or freedom. But rights are worthless if we don't know we have them. Because of this, state agents such as border guards and other officials are under an obligation to inform people crossing their borders of their right to seek international protection as refugees. And when someone does seek that protection, states are under a duty to ensure the asylum procedure is fair and effective. To help ensure fairness, people seeking asylum should be told about the right to legal advice and to interpretation. There is no such thing as a typical refugee. People of any age, race, gender or religion can be forced to leave their homes. They can come from any walk of life. All have the right to be treated equally, and states must not discriminate between them, whether in deciding to grant them asylum or after asylum has been granted. Claiming refugee status doesn't mean giving up universal human rights. Refugees still have rights to education, to access to the courts, to employment and other fundamental freedoms, including the rights to freedom of movement, to security of the person, to family life and to liberty. Like anyone else, some refugees may be vulnerable due to the trauma they have fled, or marginalized because of their age, health, gender or sexual orientation. States are under a duty to recognize the particular needs of individuals and respond to them, for instance by providing separate accommodation for people of different genders, or education for the young. Because detaining asylum seekers affects their human rights, when possible detention should be avoided, and it should be for the shortest possible period of time. Children should never be placed in immigration detention. Victims of torture and other serious violence need special attention and should generally not be detained. If someone is detained, there must be valid reasons for doing so, and those reasons must be explained to them. The conditions in which they are detained must be safe and appropriate, with detainees given access to legal advice, healthcare, and the UNHCR. Refugees have rights, just like everyone else. By knowing those rights, you can play your part in making sure they are recognized and enforced.
Refugee Blues by W.H. Auden. Say this city has 10 million souls. Some are living in mansions, some are living in holes. Yet there's no place for us, my dear, yet there's no place for us. Once we had a country and we thought it fair. Look in the atlas and you'll find it there. We cannot go there now, my dear. We cannot go there now. In the village churchyard there grows an old yew. Every spring it blossoms anew. Old passports can't do that, my dear. Old passports can't do that. The consul banged the table and said, if you've got no passport, you're officially dead. But we are still alive, my dear. But we are still alive. Went to a committee, they offered me a chair. Asked me politely to return next year. But where shall we go today, my dear? Where shall we go today? Came to a public meeting, the speaker got up and said, if we let them in, they will steal our daily bread. He was talking of you and me, my dear. He was talking of you and me. Went down the harbor and stood upon the quay. Saw the fish swimming as if they were free. Only 10 feet away, my dear, only 10 feet away. Walked through a wood and saw the birds in the trees. They had no politicians and sang at their ease. They weren't the human race, my dear. They weren't the human race. Dreamed I saw a building with 1,000 floors, 1,000 windows, and 1,000 doors. Not one of them was ours, my dear. Not one of them was ours. Stood on a great plain in the falling snow. 10,000 soldiers marched to and fro, looking for you and me, my dear, looking for you and me.
Dr. Nancy Seiden has devoted her career to human rights and social justice. She recently served as a guest editor for the International Perspectives in Psychology 2021 special issue entitled Women During COVID-19. She also received the 2021 Denmark Reuter Award for Outstanding International Contributions to the Psychology of Women and Gender. In 2019, the APA's International Learning Partner Program selected Nancy to serve as an ambassador to Kosovo. She is also a dedicated member of the ICP board. For over 20 years, Nancy's dedication to combating human trafficking has resulted in more than 65 articles, chapters, journal issues, and presentations on human trafficking. Today, she brings to us her knowledge of the effects of climate change on forced migration and human trafficking vulnerability. We welcome you, Nancy, and thank you for joining us today.
Hi, I'm Nancy Seiden, and I'm going to talk today about the impact of climate change on human trafficking. The views I share with you are my views and don't represent where I work at the Department of Defense. There are many changes happening in our environment. Our world is facing potentially catastrophic climate change and has the capacity to damage human health in multiple ways. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has concluded that greenhouse gases from human activity are the major cause of continuing global change. We know that our temperature is increasing, and this will mean more variable and extreme weather conditions. Climate change impact, ways in which our health will be affected, are the greatest challenge is the lack of food and drinkable water. There's also going to be wider spread of certain vector-borne diseases and increased health exposure. So how does the intersection of climate change and human trafficking occur? Modern day slavery or human trafficking is characterized by the exploitation of vulnerable populations and is a violation of the basic human right to autonomy and freedom affirmed by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948. While we don't know how many people are trafficked, there are some estimates. The US Department of Health and Human Services states that worldwide there are between 12 million and 27 million traffic victims, whereas the International Labor Organization estimates 40.3 million women, men, and children. So the link between climate change and human trafficking. Climate change increases natural disasters. Natural disasters displaces people. Displaced people are vulnerable, and vulnerable people are at higher risk of being trafficked, which will result in more people being trafficked. So the figures we just talked about, between 12 million and 40 million, there are going to be more. We know natural disasters, wars, and other conflicts causes millions of people each year to flee their homes, and they become vulnerable when they're displaced and prime targets for traffickers. As of 2016, approximately 65.6 million people were forcibly displaced from their homes as a result of natural disasters, conflicts, and other factors. This is the largest number since World War II of displaced people. And refugees, we know that legally classified as somebody that has as a refugee is somebody that's crossed borders of countries, and there's 22.5 million of those. However, there's another 40.3 million that are classified as internally displaced persons. Antonio Guterres, 12 years ago, who is the Secretary General of the UN, stated climate change could become the largest driving of population displacement, both inside and across national borders. So we know climate change displaces people. Most prominent are the extreme flooding and water shortages that threaten food supplies and livelihoods. And frequently these conditions are combined with existing poverty and political instability, which makes a worsening situation. We also know there's a direct causal connection between climate change and displacement when sea level rises. When sea level rises above land surface, its population has to move. While we don't know how many people will be displaced because there's a lot of uncertainty about climate change and the rate of it, and there's also differences about how societies can cope with it and the ability of new homelands and other factors, we do know that there are several estimates that put the number of people in the hundreds of millions by the middle of this century. That's less than 30 years away. So modern day slavery tends to increase after natural disasters or conflicts where large numbers of people are displaced. Climate change will very likely lead to a large increase in the number of people who are displaced and thus vulnerable for trafficking. I'd like to conclude with a quote from Desmond Tutu, where he says 25 years ago, people could be excused for not knowing much or doing much about climate change. Today, we have no excuses. Thank you. We need to get our head out of the sand and address this. Okay.
I would like to thank Dr. Seiden for sharing with us about this very important human rights topic. Last year, we were grateful to have Eastern Owl, an Indigenous women's choir from Newfoundland, share their music with us. It was truly a moving experience. We will be sharing their music again today as they honor with drums and voices the Indigenous children who were stolen from their families and placed in residential schools. As part of this year's Human Rights Observation, we would be remiss to not recognize the thousands of Indigenous children who died in these schools and whose bodies were rarely returned home. In fact, many were buried in neglected graves. To this day, we cannot be sure of the exact number of children who died in residential schools, the circumstances of their deaths, or where they were buried. However, a rising tally of these graves, more than 1,000 so far, has triggered an international reckoning over North America's legacy of residential schools. These government-funded boarding schools were part of a policy to assimilate Indigenous children and destroy Indigenous cultures and languages. Music and drums have been an important form of human community connection and ritual throughout time. First, we will hear the song Baby by the Eastern Owl Choir. And then we have invited David Edwards back to lead us in collective song. During that time, we invite you to unmute yourself if you would like to participate in the singing.
Midget today. A man dressed in black came and took you away. And baby, I know it's cold in that big schoolhouse. I want to hold you, but they just won't let you out. Weah-hey-ah, New Tagak. Weah-hey-hey, New Tagak. Weah-hey-ah, New Tagak. Weah-hey-hey, New Tagak. Don't forget about me and remember your name. I wrote you this song. I hope that it keeps you strong. Weah-hey-ah, Washish. Weah-hey-hey, Washish. Weah-hey-ah, Washish. Weah-hey-hey, Washish. Weah-hey-ah, Midjawajij. Weah-hey-hey, Midjawajij.
Let us just take a moment after that very powerful and moving musical experience to center ourselves before we move on. Now we are going to ask David Edwards to join us live, and he's going to talk to us about everyone's favorite part of our conference, us asking you all to sing. So, David, I think, yes, go ahead. We'll leave the slide up for now.
Hello, everyone. I am honored to be invited back and glad to be making music with you again. Ishe Oluwa. Some of us, we see IS at the beginning of a short word and we start to get nervous, but this one is pronounced Ishe. It is one of the earliest examples of an African composed hymn, and it comes to us from Nigeria, from the Yoruban people, and it is sung in their language, Yoruba. And the pronunciation, as I said, a little different from how it looks. The ISE, Ishe, the sh sound in there. And Oluwa, that's that next word. And then Kole Baje O, that's the second part. So Ishe Oluwa, repeat. Kole Baje O. Sing that. All right. So whenever I sing this, I like to imagine that that simple act of singing it is contributing to not only the survival, but really the thriving of the world and its people. So the melody's right in the middle of it. Ishe Oluwa. Kole Bajeo Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. So that's the first section, the first half of the song, basically. And we repeat that, sing that twice. So I'll sing half of it, you can sing it back, and then we'll sing the whole thing through, and you can sing that back. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Sing that. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. And then the second part is a little bit different. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Sing that. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. And so that whole line, I'll sing it one time through and then repeat it. And you can sing along with me when you do. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Repeat that. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Starting to hear some voices coming through. Thanks for singing along. I love it. So that's the first section. The second section just repeats the Kole Bajeo lyric with a little bit different melody. So we've just sang Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. We jump up to Ko. And we sing Kole Bajeo, Kole Bajeo, Kole Bajeo, Kole Bajeo. And I actually repeated it. I did it twice there, both times. It's the repeat. So it's half the length of the first phrase. And we repeat it. Repeat both phrases 2 times each. So again, the first part of that is Kole Bajeo. Sing that. Kole Bajeo. Second part. Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo. I'm gonna find my note again because I think. All right. So the whole thing. We're singing the first section twice, and then the second section twice. Here we go. All the way through. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Repeat that. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Second section. Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo. Kole Bajeo. And we go back to the beginning. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. What this means. Ishe Olua Kole Bajeo. Say that it means creation cannot be destroyed. That is the translation of this. And that is why we can bring such healing with our singing of it. I think it brings power to it. If you want, you can sing a harmony to it. There's a third above it. to look. It's right in the middle there. Ishe, Ishe, Ishe. This one here. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. So they're all in the 1, 3, and 5, the chord. Right? The bottom one is Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. And if you just want to sing whatever notes you want to sing, and they sound good to you, then they probably sound good to me too, if I can hear you. Take one of those notes, I'll sing right there in the melody, and feel free to harmonize as you like or sing along with me. Creation part of this tribe. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Ishe Oluwa Ishe Oluwa Koleba Sheo. 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 Ishe Oluwa Ishe Oluwa 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 Koleba Sheo. Koleba Sheo. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David.